There is a moment in life that feels almost uncomfortable when it first arrives, not because it is cruel, but because it is honest. It is the moment you realize that no one is watching as closely as you thought. No one is judging every move. No one is keeping score the way your mind insists they are. And strangely, instead of feeling abandoned, you feel lighter. For many people, this realization sounds bleak. They hear it as indifference, as neglect, as proof that their efforts don't matter. But the Stoics saw something else entirely. They saw freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private reflections, not for applause, not for posterity, but as reminders to himself. And one theme returns again and again. Most of what troubles us exists only because we imagine an audience, an invisible jury, a constant observer. But that observer is largely a fiction. People are consumed by their own struggles, their own anxieties, their own narratives. They are not studying your failures. They are managing their own. When you accept that no one cares in the way your fear suggests, something profound happens. The pressure to perform dissolves. The urge to impress weakens. The need to explain yourself loses urgency. And in that space, authenticity finally has room to breathe. This is not resignation. It is not apathy. It is clarity. Epictetus was relentless on this point. He argued that we suffer not because events are harsh, but because we expect the world to respond to us in a certain way. Approval, recognition, validation. When those expectations are not met, resentment follows. But the Stoic reverses the equation. Instead of asking, "Why doesn't anyone see me?" he asks, "Why do I need to be seen?" This question is uncomfortable because it exposes dependency, a dependence not on survival, but on affirmation. Modern culture quietly reinforces this dependency. Metrics, likes, comments, followers. Performance is constantly measured. Visibility is mistaken for worth. The Stoics would have considered this a dangerous illusion. They believed worth was internal, measured by character, by alignment between values and action, not by external response. Seneca warned that a person who lives for applause will never live in peace, because applause is unstable, it is inconsistent, and it is never fully under your control. To anchor your self-respect to it is to build on shifting ground. Acceptance that no one truly cares in the way you imagine is not an insult. It is an invitation to stop outsourcing your sense of value. When that outsourcing ends, energy returns, energy previously spent on managing perception, on crafting narratives, on explaining, defending, justifying. That energy can now be redirected toward mastery, toward competence, toward quiet progress. This shift is deeply unsettling at first, because the ego resists irrelevance. It wants to matter loudly. It wants witnesses. But Stoicism teaches that real power rarely announces itself. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the world, and yet his writings are filled with reminders to himself that praise is meaningless, reputation fleeting, and opinion unreliable. He understood something modern psychology now confirms. External validation creates dependency loops. The more you seek it, the more fragile you become, because your emotional state becomes hostage to reactions you cannot control. Acceptance severs this loop. When you stop assuming that people are watching, judging, evaluating, you regain autonomy. You begin to act from conviction rather than performance, from principle rather than popularity. This is where real confidence emerges, not the loud kind, not the performative kind, but the quiet confidence that does not require witnesses. Consider how much of your anxiety is socially constructed. Fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of being misunderstood, fear of falling behind. Most of this fear evaporates when you accept that others are too busy managing their own lives to catalog your mistakes. The Stoics did not deny social responsibility. They denied social obsession. There is a difference. You can act ethically without needing applause. You can work diligently without needing constant recognition. You can improve without announcing your progress. In fact, improvement accelerates when it is no longer tied to approval. Because you are no longer negotiating with your ego, you are building substance. This acceptance also reframes failure. Failure feels devastating when you believe it is being witnessed, when you imagine judgment. But when you accept that most people will forget your mistakes almost immediately, failure becomes informational rather than humiliating. It becomes feedback, data, a moment, not an identity. Epictetus reminded his students that embarrassment is not inherent in events. It arises from interpretation, from the belief that one has been diminished in the eyes of others. But if those eyes were never truly fixed on you, what exactly has been lost? Nothing essential, only illusion. This realization does not isolate you. It liberates you. You become more willing to try, more willing to risk, more willing to pursue paths that are personally meaningful rather than socially impressive. This is where individuality is born, not as rebellion, but as self-trust. When no one is watching, you are free to become precise, to refine, to deepen, to move slowly without explanation. The Stoics valued this invisibility. They believed the best work often happens away from attention, that virtue is most authentic when it does not seek recognition. There is a strange irony here. When you stop trying to matter to everyone, you often begin to matter more, because your actions are no longer distorted by neediness. They are cleaner, more deliberate, more consistent. People sense this, not consciously, but intuitively. They trust those who are not begging to be seen. They respect those who do not demand validation. This respect is not chaste, it emerges, and even if it does not, the Stoic is unmoved, because his worth is no longer contingent on reception. This is the first transformation, the collapse of imagined scrutiny, the release from the invisible audience. In the next part, we will explore how accepting that no one cares restructures ambition, sharpens discipline, and creates an internal standard that outperforms external pressure every time. Once you accept that no one truly cares in the way your anxiety suggests, ambition begins to change its shape. For most people, ambition is social. It is measured against others. Promotions, titles, recognition, visibility. Even the idea of success is often borrowed. It is defined by what appears impressive rather than what feels aligned. The Stoics were suspicious of this kind of ambition, not because achievement is wrong, but because borrowed ambition fractures the self. When your goals are designed for an audience, your effort becomes unstable. You work harder when watched. You drift when unseen. Your discipline depends on external pressure. This is fragile. Seneca warned that a person who needs witnesses to remain disciplined is not disciplined at all. He is managed. True discipline functions in silence. It does not require applause. It does not negotiate. It persists when no one is tracking progress. Acceptance that no one cares removes the illusion of supervision, and with it, excuses disappear. There is no one to impress, no one to deceive. Only standards you set and either honor or betray. This is uncomfortable because self-deception becomes harder when no one else is involved. But it is also empowering because progress accelerates when effort is no longer diluted by performance. Consider how many goals collapse because they are performative. People announce intentions before building capability. They seek affirmation before competence. They trade momentum for recognition. The Stoics would have considered this backwards. Epictetus emphasized that one should first become worthy of respect before desiring it. Otherwise, respect becomes a mask rather than a consequence. When no one is watching, you are forced to confront the truth of your habits, how you work, how you prepare, how you respond to boredom. This is where real discipline is forged, not in motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline is built through consistency under conditions of indifference. When effort receives no immediate reward, when progress is slow, when there is no validation, this is the environment in which excellence matures. The modern world encourages visibility, but mastery thrives in obscurity. Athletes train far more hours than they compete. Writers write far more pages than they publish. Craft is built where no one claps. The Stoics understood this long before productivity culture existed. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that the work itself is sufficient, that virtue does not require an audience. This mindset radically alters how one approaches work. You stop chasing motivation. You build systems. You stop comparing timelines. You focus on controllables: effort, preparation, judgment. Acceptance that no one cares also reshapes your relationship with status. Status anxiety is a silent tax. It drains attention. It distorts priorities. It encourages unnecessary competition. The Stoics considered status to be an indifferent, not worthless, but not essential. Its value is conditional. It can be used well or poorly, but it cannot confer worth. When you accept that people are not watching closely, status loses its hypnotic power. You stop over-optimizing appearances. You stop inflating credentials. You stop chasing symbols instead of substance. This does not make you less ambitious. It makes you more precise. Your ambition becomes internal, measured against potential rather than peers, against capability rather than comparison. This internal standard is far more demanding. External standards are vague. They fluctuate. Internal standards are exacting. They require honesty. They require self-assessment. And they cannot be negotiated away by applause. Seneca wrote that the greatest obstacle to progress is the illusion of progress. Recognition can create that illusion. It convinces people they are advancing when they are merely visible. Acceptance dissolves this illusion. It forces you to ask harder questions. Am I actually improving? Am I developing skill? Am I becoming more capable? Or am I simply being noticed? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are clarifying. They separate movement from momentum. This clarity also changes how you relate to money. Money, like status, is often treated as proof of worth, proof of intelligence, proof of success. The Stoics rejected this logic. They viewed money as a tool, useful, dangerous, never definitive. When you accept that people are not measuring your value by your income, financial decisions become calmer, less performative, more strategic. You stop spending to signal. You start allocating to build. You stop chasing lifestyle inflation. You prioritize resilience. This does not mean rejecting comfort. It means refusing dependency. Dependency on constant growth, dependency on comparison, dependency on external validation. The Stoics prized self-sufficiency, not in isolation, but in orientation. To need little is to be difficult to control. To want endlessly is to be perpetually dissatisfied. Acceptance teaches restraint. It shifts focus from accumulation to sufficiency. This sufficiency is not minimalism as an aesthetic. It is psychological independence. Independence from the opinions of others, from trends, from the pressure to keep up. This independence restores attention, attention previously fragmented by comparison, by performance, by fear of falling behind. Attention returns to what matters: craft, health, relationships, judgment, time. Time, above all, becomes precious when you accept that no one is grading your life. You stop rushing to meet imagined deadlines. You stop panicking about milestones. You realize that most timelines are socially constructed and therefore optional. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that life is short, but anxiety makes it shorter. Acceptance removes unnecessary urgency. It allows deliberate pacing. This does not mean complacency, it means efficiency. Energy is no longer wasted on optics, it is invested in substance. In the next part, we will examine how this acceptance reshapes relationships, dissolves people-pleasing, and creates a form of quiet self-respect that attracts connection without chasing it. When you accept that no one truly cares in the way your insecurity imagines, relationships begin to change, often before you consciously intend them to. Not because you become colder, but because you become clearer. Most relational tension is not caused by conflict. It is caused by expectation. Unspoken expectations. Invisible contracts. The hope that others will notice your effort. The desire to be appreciated without having to ask. The quiet belief that if you give enough, accommodate enough, sacrifice enough, someone will eventually recognize your value. The Stoics understood how dangerous this mindset is, not because generosity is wrong, but because generosity tied to recognition becomes a transaction, and unspoken transactions breed resentment. Seneca warned repeatedly against attaching emotional debt to kindness. He argued that a gift loses its virtue the moment it expects repayment. When you accept that no one is carefully tracking your sacrifices, a painful illusion collapses. You realize how often your disappointment came not from mistreatment, but from unmet expectations no one agreed to fulfill. This realization stings, but it also liberates, because it ends people-pleasing at its root. People-pleasing is not kindness. It is anxiety disguised as virtue. It is behavior driven by the fear of disapproval, by the hope of acceptance, by the need to be needed. The Stoics would have recognized this immediately. They believed that dependency corrupts judgment. If your sense of worth depends on how others respond to you, your behavior will always be compromised. You will say what is safe rather than what is true. You will tolerate what is harmful rather than what is right. You will overextend, then silently resent. Acceptance that no one is watching you as closely as you think cuts through this pattern. You stop performing emotional labor for imagined approval. You stop over-explaining. You stop negotiating your boundaries internally before stating them. This does not make you harsh. It makes you honest. Honesty is the foundation of stable relationships. Without it, connection becomes performance, and performance is exhausting. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that it is better to stand alone in integrity than to belong through pretense. This idea feels radical in a culture that prizes belonging above all else. But Stoicism teaches that belonging without self-respect is not connection. It is dependency. When you accept that people are largely absorbed in their own lives, you stop taking their reactions personally. A delayed response is no longer rejection. A lack of enthusiasm is no longer condemnation. A disagreement is no longer a threat. This emotional decoupling is powerful because it restores proportion. You stop inflating ordinary human behavior into meaning. People get tired, distracted, inconsistent. This is not a verdict on your worth. It is reality. The Stoics urged radical realism, not pessimism, accuracy. Accuracy dissolves unnecessary pain. Acceptance also reshapes loneliness. Loneliness is often misunderstood. It is not simply the absence of people. It is the presence of unmet expectations. The expectation that others should fill internal gaps. Provide constant affirmation. Supply meaning. When you accept that no one is coming to complete you, loneliness changes texture. It becomes solitude. And solitude, properly understood, is not deprivation. It is space. Space to hear your own thoughts. Space to strengthen judgment. Space to build a relationship with yourself that is not mediated through others. Epictetus emphasized that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. This consent is often given unconsciously, through comparison, through approval seeking, through the assumption that others' opinions are authoritative. Acceptance withdraws this consent. You begin to treat others' reactions as data, not directives, information, not instruction. This distinction protects self-respect. Self-respect is not arrogance. It is alignment between behavior and values. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you become more consistent. Consistency builds trust, not performative charm, not over-availability, reliability. People trust those who are predictable in principle, who do not shift identity based on context, who do not say yes out of fear and no out of resentment. Responding honestly, even when it risks disapproval, paradoxically strengthens relationships, because it removes ambiguity. Ambiguity breeds anxiety. Clarity breeds respect. The Stoics understood that conflict is not the enemy. Dishonesty is. Suppressed truth always resurfaces, usually distorted. Acceptance that no one is monitoring your social standing gives you permission to speak plainly, to disagree without hostility, to withdraw without guilt, to engage without performing. This recalibrates power dynamics. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop auditioning. You become selective, not out of superiority, out of discernment. Discernment is central to Stoic ethics. It means choosing carefully where to invest attention, energy, and emotion. Attention is finite. Energy is finite. Time is non-renewable. When you stop wasting these resources on maintaining appearances, you begin to allocate them wisely. Relationships deepen because they are no longer spread thin. You stop tolerating dynamics that require self-betrayal. Not dramatically, quietly. You disengage. You do not announce it. You simply stop feeding what drains you. This quiet withdrawal is one of the most misunderstood Stoic practices. It is often mistaken for coldness, but it is conservation. Conservation of integrity, of focus, of peace. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This is especially true in relationships. We imagine judgment. We imagine rejection. We imagine abandonment. Acceptance collapses these imagined futures. It anchors you in what is actually happening. And what is actually happening is usually manageable. When you stop assuming that people care deeply about your every move, social anxiety weakens. You stop rehearsing conversations. You stop editing yourself excessively. You stop catastrophizing small interactions. You become more natural, more grounded. This naturalness is magnetic, not because it is charming, but because it is unforced. People feel at ease around those who are not managing impressions, who are not fishing for reactions, who are not monitoring themselves constantly. This ease cannot be faked. It emerges only when the need for validation dissolves. The Stoics never advocated isolation. They advocated independence within connection. To care without clinging. To engage without losing oneself. To accept others as they are without demanding they complete you. This acceptance also prepares you for loss. Loss of people. Loss of approval. Loss of roles. Because when identity is not anchored to external response, loss hurts, but it does not destroy. You grieve without collapsing. You adapt without bitterness. You continue without resentment. This resilience is not emotional suppression. It is emotional literacy. You feel fully, but you do not dramatize. You experience pain, but you do not build identity around it. In the final part, we will bring everything together, how this acceptance reshapes freedom, meaning, and purpose. Why realizing that no one cares is not nihilism, but the beginning of a life governed from within. And how to live this philosophy daily, quietly, steadily, without needing permission. At some point, acceptance stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like a position from which you observe life differently. The realization that no one cares in the way your fear once suggested does not hollow life out. It strips life down, and what remains is essential. The Stoics never pursued comfort. They pursued freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, freedom from illusion. Illusion is expensive. It costs energy, attention, peace. The illusion that you are constantly being evaluated keeps the nervous system alert. It creates unnecessary urgency. It transforms ordinary moments into performances. When this illusion dissolves, the mind relaxes, not into laziness, into clarity. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that life is happening now, not in the opinions of others, not in reputation, not in imagined futures, but in the present moment, the only place where action is possible. Acceptance returns you to this moment. It reduces mental noise. The constant internal commentary quiets. You stop narrating your life for an imaginary audience. And in that silence, something unfamiliar appears. Choice. Most people believe they are choosing, but much of their behavior is reactive, driven by fear of judgment, fear of exclusion, fear of being irrelevant. When you accept that people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you assumed, these fears lose leverage. They no longer dictate behavior. You regain authorship. Authorship is responsibility. There is no one to impress, no one to blame, no one to perform for. Only actions you either stand behind or don't. This responsibility is heavy at first because excuses disappear. But it is also grounding because responsibility anchors meaning. Meaning is not given, it is constructed through deliberate action, through consistency, through living in accordance with values rather than validation. The Stoics were clear about this. A meaningful life is not a pleasurable one. It is a coherent one. Coherence between belief and behavior, between intention and action, between inner judgment and outer conduct. Acceptance is what makes coherence possible. Without it, behavior fragments. You become one person alone and another in public. One person in ambition and another in relationships. This fragmentation produces anxiety. Stoicism restores unity. You become one person everywhere, not because you are rigid, but because you are rooted. Rooted in principle, rooted in reason, rooted in the understanding that approval is optional. This rooting produces calm, not passive calm, active steadiness, a readiness to engage without being consumed, to act without attachment to outcome. Epictetus taught that the only thing truly under your control is your judgment, not success, not reputation, not response. Judgment. Acceptance makes this lesson livable. Without acceptance, this idea feels abstract. With acceptance, it becomes practical. You stop demanding that the world cooperate with your expectations. You adapt, not by surrendering, by adjusting your aim. Stoicism never asked people to withdraw from life. It asked them to participate intelligently, to invest effort where effort matters, to release concern where concern is wasted. This discrimination is the foundation of freedom. Freedom from emotional whiplash, from comparison, from compulsive explanation, from the endless need to be understood. You realize something subtle but powerful. Being misunderstood does not harm you. Being misaligned with yourself does. When you accept that others are not keeping detailed records of your life, the need to correct every misunderstanding fades. You conserve energy. You pick your battles. You allow ambiguity. This restraint is maturity. The Stoics believed that maturity is the ability to tolerate being unseen, to work without applause, to endure discomfort without dramatization, to persist without reassurance. This capacity is rare, and it changes everything because it makes you difficult to manipulate. Marketing loses its grip. Social pressure weakens. Trends lose authority. You are no longer easily steered by fear of missing out or fear of falling behind. You move deliberately. This deliberateness slows life down, not externally, internally. Time feels fuller. Moments feel less rushed. You are no longer racing an imaginary clock. You are living. And living, properly understood, is not about accumulation. It is about attention. Where attention goes, life follows. Acceptance frees attention. It releases it from self-monitoring, from comparison, from anxiety. Attention returns to what you are doing, who you are with, what you are building. This presence is the quiet reward of Stoic practice. Not happiness, presence. Presence allows satisfaction, even in struggle, even in effort, even in uncertainty, because you are no longer split. You are here. The Stoics accepted mortality without melodrama. They understood that life's brevity makes pretense absurd. Why perform for an audience that will soon be gone? Why exhaust yourself seeking approval that evaporates? Acceptance aligns you with this truth. It does not make life bleak, it makes it precise. Urgency is replaced with intentionality, anxiety with discipline, restlessness with direction. You stop waiting to be noticed. You start becoming capable. You stop trying to matter loudly. You begin to matter quietly. And quiet impact lasts. This is the final transformation, not detachment from life, but engagement without illusion. If you've stayed with this reflection, it suggests a preference for depth over noise, for clarity over comfort. Remaining connected supports the continuation of work that values reason, discipline, and inner freedom. If someone you respect would recognize themselves in these ideas, sharing them may open a conversation worth having. And if you choose to leave a comment, let it be thoughtful, not a reaction, a response, because this entire philosophy rests on that distinction. The Stoics did not promise ease. They offered liberation, not from hardship, but from the unnecessary suffering created by illusion. When you accept that no one cares in the way you once feared, you stop living for an audience, and for the first time, you begin to live deliberately, from the inside out.